Hi, I'm Tintin Wisniewski from the Hoover Institution. Hoover's Career Task Force on K-12 education, with the help of some friends, has attempted to project what American education might look like in the year 2030. By that time, today's newborn will become college freshmen. The task of looking so far ahead while refreshing is also quite formidable. We invite you to join us in this predictive video presentation in search for solutions to the challenges that American education faces in the years ahead. For more information about this project, please visit our website at americaneducation2030.com. Carolyn Hoxby is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and Scott and Donia Baumer Professor of Economics at Stanford University, where she specializes in economics of education, school choice, and school reform. She shows how teacher compensation and teacher effectiveness will be transformed over the next 2 decades.
Today, in 2030, unlike in the past, teachers are paid like professionals, are managed like professionals, and are, in fact, very skilled workers. I do not just mean that teachers like to think of themselves as professionals, they really are professionals. Teachers are paid on the basis of what they contribute to student learning, broadly construed. This type of pay encourages productive teachers to stay in education, and it encourages unproductive teachers to find other work. Such pay also encourages teachers to continually engage in improving their pedagogical skills and their knowledge of their subject area. Teachers are flexible on the job. They do a wide variety of tasks, depending on their skills. There is no such thing as working to rule, because now there is no longer any rule that determines what is and is not in a teacher's job. Teachers are paid well, but not because of rigid contracts attained through collective bargaining. They are paid well because they are worth it. All this matters because teachers are by far the most important input into primary and secondary education. Not surprisingly, having a truly professional teaching workforce has transformed America's schools. They are much better today than they were back in the bad old days of 2010. Back in 2010, it was hard to see how we would get here from there. At the time, teachers liked to call themselves professionals, but their pay, hiring, and training had more in common with auto industry workers than with true professionals like doctors and lawyers. Teachers' compensation depended entirely on their seniority and whether they had a master's degree. Pay did not depend on how well they taught students or how much they contributed to schools. Teachers with 30 years of experience were routinely paid 3 times as much as beginning teachers, even if they were far less effective. Schools paid more to teachers with education certificates, even if everyone knew that the credentials were worthless. No guarantee of skills or knowledge. High-performing principals often thought little of education schools because they were so focused on inculcating social philosophy rather than on making effective classroom teachers. Similarly, high-performing principals viewed most of what was called professional development as little more than a way for teachers to get paid days off. Unions, or union-like contracts, made it nearly impossible for schools to remove teachers with poor performance. In fact, in big urban districts, even grossly negligent teachers were often able to stay employed. What changed all this? Well, there were 3 factors. The first factor was the development of longitudinal databases in which students could be followed consistently over time, even when they changed schools. These data linked students' records to those of their teachers. Using statistical methods that were validated using scientific random assignment studies, researchers used these databases to compute teachers' effects on student learning. Although the statistical methods are complicated, the basic logic is simple. Suppose Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Smith both teach 3rd grade in exactly the same school. If, year after year, teachers assigned to Mrs. Jones learn more than teachers assigned to Mrs. Smith, then it must be that Mrs. Jones's effect is better than Mrs. Smith's. When researchers computed teachers' effects statistically, they found that teachers differed greatly. Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Smith often produced learning gains that differed by as much as half a grade equivalent every year. Researchers even found that some teachers consistently produced learning losses. It also turned out that teachers' effects did not depend on their credentials or their experience once they got past that initial year of teaching. With the data from these longitudinal systems in their hands, School administrators became unwilling to pay teachers regardless of whether they were effective. They became unwilling to pay just based on credentials and seniority. The data undermined the union's argument that rigid pay schedules promoted fairness. Teachers thought exactly the opposite was true. Effective teachers thought it was unfair that they were underpaid because they were forced to subsidize their ineffectual colleagues. Effective teachers ended up writing new contracts in which they were paid based on their contribution to their school, broadly construed. Principals did not just take into account the data on teachers' effects, they also considered whether a teacher was, say, a good mentor for other teachers, wrote great lesson plans that he or she shared with other teachers, and whether the teacher could motivate students to be disciplined, go to college, and so on. The second factor that changed teaching was technology, that made it possible for schools to substitute remote teacher services for those of some local teachers. Around 2010, technology became truly interactive, allowing students to interact with a remote teacher in a spontaneous, flexible way. Thus, schools began to offer courses through what were called virtual schools, in which expert teachers who were sometimes located far away led classrooms, answered questions, diagnosed learning problems, and provided feedback on assignments. Technology affected learning through a few channels. It meant that principals were no longer willing to employ local teachers who were ineffective. It was just so easy to find an expert teacher online. Also, local teachers were able to learn how to be more effective by working with remote expert teachers. More importantly, technology broke teachers' unions' local monopolies. Unions had been able to prevent individual teachers from making better contracts with their schools, but unions were unable to control remote teachers in virtual schools, and soon all teachers wanted the freedom to contract for themselves. The third factor that changed teaching was choice and competition among schools. It was choice and competition that made school principals performance-oriented. It was choice and competition that made principals willing to confront their local unions and dismantle bad contracts. It all began with choice schools, such as charter schools. They were early adopters of flexible pay. Recognizing that teachers were all important, some charter schools even offered teachers very high pay, but only if they were effective and expert. Such charter schools outcompeted other schools that stuck with the traditional, rigid pay systems. Well, that situation could not last. More and more families wanted to send their children to the effective charter schools. Eventually, competition induced all schools to think more flexibly about how to hire, pay, and manage teachers. So that is how we got to today, 2030, a year in which people are proud to be teachers. Teaching is a respected, high-quality profession. Talented people from top colleges enter teaching and stay in it. Poor teachers either improve or figure out that they need to find a different career. Education schools offer training that works and continually test their curricula using scientific methods of evaluation. Of course, teachers' unions still exist, but now they focus on resolving legitimate grievances and helping members to contract effectively for themselves. In short, the future of teaching is bright, and a bright future for teaching is a bright future for schools.